Welcome, guys, to another episode of Couch Catechism. I'm your host, Michael Obeid. I've got a very special guest tonight, Christian Stevens. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Thanks for coming on. I just found out now that you're younger than me, so I found that a bit weird because you taught me at university when I did my postgrad there. You taught me Foundations of Moral Theology, and I was actually blown away when you were teaching me. You left me a lot to think about, and that's the reason why I wanted to get a brain like you on the show to tackle some good questions that I've got ready for you. So thanks for coming.
I can only do my best, Michael.
Yeah.
We'll see how we go.
Listen, don't have to be humble, okay? You know you're good at what you do, okay? So I'm gonna test you.
I'm coming in off the back of some great guests.
Yeah.
You know, Robert Andrews, Tony Matter.
Yep.
So we'll see how we go.
Okay. Well, I've got an interesting talk that I want to. Well, we're going to go through some interesting things tonight. Now, before we get started, can you just tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, what it is that you do?
Yeah. So I lecture in the School of Philosophy and Theology at the University of Notre here in Sydney.
Yeah.
And my teaching areas are predominantly around moral theology, as you said, introduction to Christian spirituality I'm teaching this year, and also our core curriculum. So everyone who comes to Notre Dame at the undergraduate level, we give them a basic understanding of philosophy, ethics, and theology. And that's part of the great Catholic tradition of believing that universities aren't glorified TAFEs, so to speak, where it's just about here's the buttons to push, here's the strings to pull, but the formation of a person for life. And so the core curriculum tries to communicate some of that. And it means that I'm speaking to lots of people from every conceivable background about some of the things we know and love.
Yeah. And how long have you been doing that for now?
So 7.5 or 8 years.
Wow.
About that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And how did you fall into that position, or how did it all happen for you?
Yeah. Well, look, this is something I'm still working out myself.
Okay.
You know, I've got to kind of think the straightforward answer is God's providence.
Okay.
You know, and everything is a footnote to that.
Yeah.
I did an undergraduate degree in exercise science, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it and whatnot. And I could probably give you a hint into one conversation that I had with someone that stands out. Is an auntie of mine, and I don't know if I've ever told her this.
Okay.
I was in the car with her, and her husband is a cinematographer. And I'm sitting there not sure what I want to do with myself, and I just come back to the faith, and she was just saying, you know, one of the things I love about him, her husband, is that when he wakes up in the morning, he doesn't know if what he does is for business or pleasure, that he'd do it anyway, even if he wasn't getting paid.
Oh, wow.
And just this light went off, and I thought, man, that's living the dream. You know, that's if fulfilling your vocation means anything, it's got to have something to do with that.
Wow. And
I thought to myself, well, what do I love doing? I love reading about the faith. I love studying it. I love speaking to people about it. And that kind of begun a journey that led me into the Seminary of the Good Shepherd for 1 year in 2009. And I discerned out at the end of that year and enrolled in a Masters of Philosophy, and it kind of just went from there. And I had some great teachers at the time, and they were helping stretch me, and then they must have seen some potential in me and did some work for the university chaplaincies, as Tony mentioned.
Yep.
And got a call one day from Peter Holmes, who said, hey, you know, we got a position available here. Do you think you might be interested?
Oh, wow.
And, you know, I can remember exactly where I was standing at the moment.
Yeah. And
I thought, you beauty, here we go, let's see.
Awesome.
You know?
And haven't looked back?
No, it's been an amazing journey. You know, I've kept studying. I've got my Masters of Arts in Theology after completing the Masters in Philosophy. I'm currently doing my doctorate in Moral Theology at the moment. And, you know, thanks be to God, I can honestly say that I've captured something of what my auntie was telling me about, that when I wake up in the morning, what would I love to be doing?
Yeah.
You know, it's studying and learning about the faith and speaking to it about people and trying to help them in that way.
Well, and what's your doctorate? What's your main thesis?
Yeah, so I'm studying the nature of idolatry in the work of St. Thomas.
Okay.
And the point there is to see whether it has some contemporary applications. Okay. So to give you a sense of why that might be something interesting, is we've seen a huge spike in those who identify as having no religion. And as you're aware, the first commandment is against worshipping false gods.
Yep.
And it would be really unusual if saying you don't have a religion means you automatically tick the first commandment. You know, how can I worship idols if I don't worship anything? Or how can I worship false gods if I don't believe in God? And so that's opening up a really interesting situation where due to some shifts in our understanding of what religion is and what gods are and are not, there's the possibility that in fact we're radically religious about the wrong things, and we realize we can't serve those false gods and the living God. So perhaps we're seeing a time when the first commandment actually is extremely applicable. And so I'm going to look into that and see what's going on.
Well, you know what? You've brought up a couple of things that I'm probably going to want to ask you as we move along.
Yeah.
So, but
I might ask you for some tips as well. I wish I brought some notes. Get this doctorate done while we're having an interview.
Well, why not? Maybe you can use this as evidence to whoever is coordinating or supervising your doctorate.
I'll reference the interview on this day. Yeah,
that's good. Or maybe you can even use it with your students as well for anyone who's doing some of your courses. But that brings us into the topic of discussion for what we want to talk about tonight. So the reason why I brought you on as well is. Or the reason why I brought you on is to discuss why teenagers or why people, especially teenagers, I guess, why they find God boring. Or we can even move into why they don't believe in God. And the idea just popped into my head because I teach at a school where students are very indifferent to religion. And to me, I find that almost like a shock, because with my own upbringing, I always found this, even though I wasn't really religious and I wasn't practicing religion, I found this sense of peace knowing that there was a God who existed and that I'd eventually work my way out to somehow come back to him. That's the kind of long story
He was
short,
always in the background.
But he existed, the idea that God existed for me was a lot less scary then, because I didn't know much anyway, than God not existing. But I'm finding that kids these days, young kids, are very comfortable with believing that God does not exist.
Yeah.
And I find that very alarming. And I think it also comes from a sense of indifferentism, if that's a word, sorry.
Yeah. Well, it works.
And I find that people are just indifferent, and I don't know whether it's because they don't care. We're going to get into some of the reasons why they might not care, but I noticed that even at a university level, where people have now broken out of home, they now start to claim to think for themselves. They're more independent. They're a lot more vocal about their beliefs. And what I'm tending to find is that there's a lot of religious indifference, or people that classify themselves as not religious. And why I think that's important as well is because on my own Facebook account, I've got over about 1,000 friends. Okay?
Yeah.
And these have friends that have accumulated from when I was at school to when I was working multiple different jobs to now. So probably 90% of them, 95% of them aren't even religious.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, I want to talk about something. I want to bring up an important topic that would appeal to them, to get some of them tuning in and listening, and maybe just getting them to think about some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So, do you find students in your classes interested in talking about God? What's the sentiment at the moment?
Look, it's a huge mix, you know. Absolutely there are people interested in talking about it, you know, and you might be surprised to find out that we tend to find the people who are very interested in talking about it are people who come from non-religious backgrounds. You know, there's a sense in which they realize it's very foreign to them. They don't know anything about this. But there's a natural wonder and curiosity about the big questions in life.
Okay.
So that's a very important thing to note, that there absolutely are people who are interested in discussing things. And I say that they're interested in discussing. It doesn't mean that they all share a common set of ideas, but they appreciate there is a natural role to play in asking ultimate questions: where we come from, where are we going, why is there evil, etc. You know, and I think that's a sign also of an integrated personality and character. You know, that the moment you find a student who's willing to discuss these things calmly and reasonably, it's a general indicator that things are going well for them. You know. Now, sorry,
when you mean going well for them in their personal life, or in terms of the genuineness about them wanting to ask the questions?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I would say it's the wanting to ask the questions.
Yeah.
You know, it's a sign of an openness to the possibility of inquiry and, to a certain extent, faith in reason, that if we discuss this, we can somehow go somewhere.
Okay.
You know. In terms of people who don't want to talk about it, again, there's lots of different reasons. Some people don't want to talk about it because they believe they've heard it all before, and this is a very difficult group. Generally, that group come from nominally Christian or Catholic homes.
Yep.
They've gone through the Catholic school system. And I describe them as being vaccinated against the faith.
Oh,
right. Now
that's a good term. I've actually never heard that before.
The reason I say vaccinated is because how do you vaccinate someone against something? You expose them to it in very superficial ways over a long period of time, so that they get desensitized to it.
Wow.
You know, that they develop a set of psychological responses to hearing those words.
Yep.
You know. Whereas someone who's hearing these words for the first time says, Christian, what does that mean? I've got no idea what that means.
Yep.
Whereas someone who's vaccinated against it has this immediate sense of flippancy or contempt for it.
Yep.
You know? And the amazing thing about speaking to these students is you've got to try and raise some level of self-awareness that perhaps their own personal experiences of the faith or church or family aren't genuine universal indicators of the truth of the claims involved, you know.
Is that hard?
It's not, but it's not comfortable for people to do that.
Okay.
You know. So say, for example, I say to a student, so you've had this stuff rammed down your neck since you were, 6 years old. Yeah. You've been in Catholic schools for 13 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I said to them, you'd just be able to rattle off the 10 Commandments like that, wouldn't you? You've just had it rammed in your neck. You know? And you see something, this little spark go out in their eye.
Yeah.
And they're dreading me saying, okay, list the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had one student who's been able to do it.
And is that how you start them off?
No, this is another important thing. A lot more people are willing to talk about it in one-on-one context than in a group. A group creates a social dynamic where there are expectations, there are fears and concerns.
Yep.
So say, for example, and I see this all the time, is generally you present some content and then you'll say, are there any questions?
Nobody puts their hand up?
And, you get people put their hands up, but it takes courage.
Yeah, it
and
does.
I really respect the students that do that.
Yeah.
Because sitting next to them is someone who just wants this to be over with.
Yeah.
Sitting behind them is someone who perhaps could even resent them for something they're about to say. and hold it against them when they leave the class. You know, so it takes a lot more courage in that group environment. So that's what I would say, that some people who don't want to talk about it have been vaccinated against it, and they believe that their experience of it is somehow definitive when it's not. They think they've got knowledge that they don't have. Another group of people who don't want to talk about it are often those who you could say are aware that they're wrestling with their own sins and vices, and they feel like that if we talk about this, I'm going to be exposed.
Okay.
You know, and so there's a much stronger moral element to it, where they don't want to talk about it because it could be shedding light on things they don't want to have light shed on.
They're worried about the consequences on their lifestyles. That could be. But I even mean something before that. You know, we naturally guard ourselves where we're wounded, where we're weak. You know, if you think of sporting analogies, often when players are injured, it's more difficult to play because you're constantly thinking of that injury. You know, you see someone coming up and you think, we've got to protect this part. And conversations are no different. Okay.
That when we're aware of the wounds that sin has left in us, or that is leaving in us, or has left in our loved ones, there's a sense in which that's very present to their mind. Even though we don't know what it is, that's an obstacle to them wanting to talk about it. And, you know, so in those cases, it's very important to try and discern when you're speaking to someone, whether they're someone who needs a pat on the back or a kick up the bum. Okay. When you're in a group environment, it shows you how difficult that is, because those two people are sitting next to each other. The person who is really weighed down with the realization of their own faults and weaknesses and is wondering whether there's any chance for them. So you could say the person in the group of despair, they're sitting next to someone in the group of presumption, and you're trying to talk to both of them. Okay. You know, so it creates a difficult teaching environment, but, you know, I hope to have something for each of them as we're talking, and then hopefully it plants a seed, and as St. Paul said, someone in a different environment might come along and water it.
Water it. So with that dynamic, do you tend to find that kids or students will send you an email or want to wait back after class to want to have one of those conversations with you? Does it happen after they finish their course? What are some of the experiences that you've had when dealing with this?
So you do get people hanging back to ask questions, you know, and it's one, my experience shows that as well, the people who want to hang back and ask questions often already have a set of strong beliefs about things, but are interested in getting to the truth of it, you know. So the reason I mention that is because it's counter to the narrative, to the idea that if you've got two people with strong beliefs who come into contact with each other, there's going to be violence. There's going to be bloodshed outside the classroom.
It's not like that.
It's not like that at all. And they're the most fruitful ones, you know.
Because they're hungry for that truth.
Exactly, and you can respect that. It's the indifference or it's the flippancy that
that's hardest to manage.
It's hardest to manage, and as well, you could say it's the one that, you know, manage is a word I probably wouldn't like to use. But it's difficult. It's difficult to engage.
Engage. That's interesting that you say that, because I feel like I'm in an environment similar to yours in the classroom, but obviously I'm dealing with kids that are a lot younger. But what I tend to find that what sucks the energy out of me more than anything is the indifferent. Like it's when the kids don't care. It's like, I can't just wait to get out of here. I would rather someone be passionately against something that I hold to, or a belief that I hold to, or a truth that the church teaches. I would rather that than just, I can't wait for this class to be over and I just want to get out of here.
You've got young kids, Michael, so do I, so you know this. The moment kids can start talking, why. They start hitting you with the why questions.
The why questions.
Why?
Yep.
Why? Why? Because they're intellectual. They want to know the truth of things. They perceive cause and effect and things like that. And you've probably been in this situation. You only get 2 or 3 whys in where all of a sudden you start coming up with some pretty poor answers.
Very bad answers.
You know what I'm saying?
Very bad answers.
You're only 2 or 3 whys in.
Yeah.
So kids are naturally curious.
They are.
And so what that leads me to ask is, if kids are naturally curious, what happens between them asking why, show me, they've got wonder about the world, to that part of save it for someone else, I don't want to hear it. Something's happened along the way, you know? And so I think one of the things that we've got to try and get back to is realizing it's a waste of time to try and answer questions people don't have. What we have to start with is showing them the significance of the question.
Yep.
You know, so I've got a number of icebreakers that I use with students, and one of them is an example of one of our education students coming back from prac. She's on lunchtime duty, eating a sandwich, and she notices that one of the less athletic kids who has big glasses, not many friends, is surrounded by the so-called cool kids.
Yeah.
And she thinks this is a bullying situation for sure. But she doesn't go over straight away because this boy in the middle has a big smile on his face. She's like, what could they be telling him to make him smile? You know, I know their history.
Yep.
She waits a few minutes and the group disperses, and the boy starts walking towards her with this big smile on his face. And when he's a safe enough distance away from the bigger group start laughing hysterically and pointing at him. He's too far away to hear it. And I pause the story there and I tell the students, now let me just fill you in on what's happened here. The cool kids decided that they would play a prank on this poor boy by pretending to be his friend. Because of course it's absurd we would want to be friends with someone like him. So just for our own entertainment, we'll say, hey, you know, we want to hang out with you on the weekend and play games together. And this boy thought it was the best day of his life. His fears of loneliness, his fears of bullying, his doubts about whether he's likable and lovable, all just washing away. And he couldn't wait to tell a teacher who'd been helping him through some tough times, hey, don't worry, it's going to be good from now on.
Wow.
It was all a prank. Now, when I tell students this story, I raise their mind to a few spontaneous reactions they'll probably have into it. You know, you probably felt sorry for the boy who's the victim of the prank. You know, you probably thought to yourself, I wouldn't want to be in that position. You probably thought someone's got to fix those boys up. You know, someone's got to tell them you can't play with people's emotions like this.
It's unjust.
You know, and I then, you know, get them to get their intuitive thoughts together. And I then asked them the question, as this boy was walking back to the teacher, was he happy? You know, and it's very interesting what takes place now, because most of them will say he is happy simply because he's having an emotional experience. But this is the same guy 3 minutes earlier who they felt sorry for, who they wouldn't want to be in his position, and who they were going to say the boys who put him in that place should be punished in some way. You know, but now they're saying he's happy, you know. So I get them to see, you know, what's this tension here? Do you normally feel sorry for happy people? Do you normally not want to be in their position? Do you normally want to correct people who make other people happy? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And what I then get them to see is the role that truth plays in genuine happiness, as opposed to being the victim of illusions and fantasies.
Wow.
And you can see lights go on, right? And I tell them that what this then means is that one of the key projects of every philosopher and theologian from the beginning of recorded history is make sure you're not that boy in the middle.
Okay.
That the truth matters, and that whatever you think you've got if it's apart from the truth, it's illusion, and it's actually one of the deepest forms of slavery that a human being can be in. Not a slavery of their body, but of the very mind itself.
Wow.
And so suddenly now I've tried to tap into that part of them that was asking questions earlier, that thought truth matters, They all laugh. I say for example, the man of your dreams came up to you. And
is this to all the girls?
Yeah. But the guys still enjoy this as well. I think partly they're imagining they're the guy.
Okay, yeah.
And say, he says to you, look, I want to marry you. I will treat you right. Mm-hmm. We'll do all the right things. But just know I won't really love you. I'm just doing this to kind of impress my parents.
Okay.
But I promise I'll be that good an actor you'll never know.
Okay.
And they laugh, and I say, well, what's funny?
Yeah.
Don't you want, all of these other things? What does it matter if it's not honest, if it's not true? And so if we can basically just try and recover that sense of the importance of the truth, then suddenly things like revelation, suddenly things like supernatural faith start to come into play in a way they weren't into play in what we could call a typical postmodern mindset.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I'm going to use that with my students, but I've got a feeling that there'll be a lot of interruptions in between, and I don't know if many people are going to get it, but I'm going to use it anyway, okay?
Yeah,
so
well, there's
I'm going to hold
examples,
you to that,
the examples are endless. You could come up with them,
But the relationship one as well, I think it's one that resonates especially a lot with younger kids, because a lot of kids just want to be in relationships. But they also, one thing that I find with students as well is that when we're speaking about like a topic of marriage, for example, and I ask them the question, put your hand up who here wants to be married. A lot of people put their hands up, and then I say, put your hand up if you want to be cheated on, and nobody puts their hand up. So it's almost like I'm appealing to an emotion where they want to be in faithful, truthful, honest relationships.
They've got a natural inclination to justice.
That's right.
That even if they can't articulate it, it's there. And this is a very important point. I think too often people get asked what they think if it's not Twitter with its, however many 200 characters, whatever it is, or Facebook, it's in too quick a setting. What do you think about this? This is what I think.
Yeah.
But we got to ask ourselves, is this person just using this language because that's the only language they know, or how do I know what they even mean by that? So to give you an example, I would say the vast majority of people who identify themselves as atheists, when I'm talking to them, it only takes us 5 minutes to work out they're not atheists. But for them, that word comes to signify a lot of different things.
So what do you mean by that?
So say, for example, they might be agnostic in actual fact. So
atheist is somebody that denies the proposition that God exists, and agnostic doesn't know.
An agnostic either would say they don't know or we can't know.
Okay.
It would be one of those things.
Would the agnostic...
I would again say that many people who say they're agnostics are not actually once you get into it. I think that a category that often gets left out of these things because it's perhaps not as socially respectable is the category of people who are angry with God.
Okay. So they know that God exists, but they're angry with him for certain reasons.
I don't know if I'd say they know he exists, but when you listen to the way they talk, they're certainly talking as if
God
there's
exists.
Someone in the room.
Well, that's the reason why I
because it would be very weird if he wasn't, for them to be talking the way they are.
Yeah. That's true. You're right.
Yeah, but there's no one. You ask someone, do you believe in God? And no one's going to say yes, and I hate him, or yes, and I'm angry, or yes, but I feel. No one's going to say that. It's just easier to say no, I don't.
That's right. No, but what's interesting though is that with these same people, they feel this inclination or this sense that within the world there are injustices, whether it's poverty, whether it's rich people oppressing poor people, or they feel that there's some sort of an injustice there. Yeah. And you notice that there is a connection between that injustice and their sentiment about a God not existing in light of that injustice. So, for example, I don't believe in God because if God did exist, this wouldn't happen, you know? Yeah. But it's almost like, but maybe there is a God, but I just don't understand why this is not happening. Or maybe there is a God, but he's the reason why this injustice is taking place.
Yeah.
So it's not, and like you said, that you're right, like they are angry with God.
There's more going on.
There's more going on.
That's right.
So that would bring me to my next question. If you think about that, what are some false presuppositions or some false beliefs that people have about God or have about faith?
Straight away, you know, even the mixing of words like God, faith, religion, whatever, you know what I mean? But people will be like that whole conglomerate
of whatever that is.
Whatever that is, anything in that pile of things.
They just don't even want to define it,
which is interesting because God, faith and religion are three very different things.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Look, misunderstandings about God are plentiful, and I think we should put ourselves also under scrutiny here as well, because
as theists, as believers,
that's right. Because St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest, if not the greatest philosopher and theologian in the church, says that we can't know what God is in his essence in this life. You know, now we could talk a lot more about this, but the point is that we're talking about something greater than any idea can get our head around, you know. So to give you an example, we mentioned earlier cause and effect. You know, kids ask why, you know, and that's, you're considered to know something when you know why it is what it is, you know. How do you get to understand it? Is you look at what's standing under it, its causes, you know, now it makes sense, you know. Now, when you come to the first cause, by definition, nothing causes God, right? And that already is a big thing for people to get, because there are still people who think that asking the question, well, then what caused God, is some profound knockdown argument.
I was actually thinking that as you were saying that, because I was going to ask you, is that kind of like their super... because I used to play Street Fighter, you know how like they got the super moves and things like that. And they got that one move that like destroys them and kills them, like they finish him. They're like, you know what? Who caused God? Or who brought God into existence? Like that's supposed to be the KO question. That's going to leave you going... It's not like that though, is it?
No, it's not. Because this is part of, and again, this is part of the way natural reason arrives at the existence of something that necessarily is, which we call God. And that is, you only need a cause for something when its properties are not essential to it. Okay? So say, for example, I know you don't have to exist right now and you never had to exist. So it's a great question to ask, well, what caused Michael to exist? And what's keeping him in existence now, you know? And so wherever we see that things don't have to be that way, or what we would call contingency, you could say, we look for causes. But if there was something that just is the pure act of existence, then to ask what gives that existence is to realize you're not asking a sensical question, you know. It's like asking how many flat sides does a circle have? Well, the answer is 0. And it's not wiggling out. It's just that if you know what kind of shape we're talking about, you realize that question doesn't apply.
That's right.
And so here again, in terms of conceptions of God, people often have very pictorial or imaginary conceptions of God that are often simply thinking of him as the biggest thing in the universe, or a kind of Thor-like figure
Yep.
with the most superpowers.
Like a superhero.
Exactly like that, you know.
Yeah.
And so hence it does seem that it can be easily dismissed, or, you know, the existence of God would be decided by going out and looking around
And trying to find him
trying to
somewhere.
find where's Thor's boot,
Yeah.
where's his footprint.
Well, you know, that reminds me of there was an astronaut,
Yeah.
and when he was in space, he looked out and into the darkness and said, "I have now come to the realization or proven."
Well,
or
I
come
looked
to the
around
con-
there-
I looked around and I came to the conclusion that there is no God.
I don't know if he said he came to the conclusion.
Or,
He
"I
says,
looked around, I found no God."
there is no
There
God.
is no God.
Now, this is the thing. When someone says something like that,
Yep.
it makes me think this person is so radically ignorant about what we mean by God
Yeah.
that perhaps he just hasn't heard what we think God is.
Yeah.
So what he's negating, or what he's saying doesn't exist, I would say doesn't exist as well.
Yeah, well, I would
Because
agree with you. I'd be
yeah,
like,
it's just
did you have to travel that far to
it's
come up with that?
That's the thing. Why you would think any object that's going to be constricted in time or space as part of the framework of creation
Yeah.
is going to be its author and the origin of it all. Well, that's just self-contradictory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bishop Robert Barron has a great example.
Mm-hmm.
He says, you know, if you walk into a room and someone says, you know, we're trying to decide whether this room has an architect or not, you couldn't then just walk around the room and try and move things around and say, we're trying to find the architect.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
You know?
Yeah.
To some extent, once you realize what we're talking about, you realize everything you lay eyes on is revealing the architect.
Yeah.
You know, and so students will often say this to me, you know, well, where's your proof for the existence of God? And the first thing I like to ask them is, well, what would constitute proof for you? Mm-hmm. You know, and it's amazing how many of them haven't asked that. What would constitute proof?
Yeah.
And the reason I think that a lot of them haven't asked that is because they use that question as an acid to dissolve them having to, you know, respond to something or perhaps even be under the microscope for something for one reason or another.
Yep.
You know, so saying where's your proof, it gives them the appearance of being evidence-based scientific people. But then once I ask them, well, what would constitute proof or evidence?
Yep.
It shows you they haven't really thought about it.
So they can't even answer that question. They've never thought about that.
No, because say for example, often when we think of proof or evidence, we think of an artifact, a material thing.
That's right.
You know, very few people would think of reasons. You know, now what this then means is that, well, if God is immaterial, he doesn't leave footprints or fingerprints. You know, and his immateriality, by the way, is not accidental. It's because everything that's made of stuff out of matter is composed.
Yep.
And everything that's composed requires a cause.
That's right.
You know, so once you start to understand the proofs for the existence of God, his immateriality is part of it. That if you're thinking of something that is material, even if it's the biggest, most powerful thing around, it's not God, because it has a cause and it is working within a situation of space, time, laws of nature that it requires to act and live in. You know?
Now, how hard would that be for people who have never been asked these kinds of questions when they come into your classes to be able to wrap their heads around these kinds of ideas? Because I'm just thinking about maybe some of our listeners, and they're probably going, Christian, you're like, a lot of the stuff that you're saying right now is like, it's going over my head, or I'm just...
Yeah, I understand. You know, is this guy crazy or am I dumb? Which one is it?
Which one is it? Or do I need someone to translate this for me into English?
But you know what? But do you know what? The most, arguably, one of the most famous philosophers of all time, Socrates, the father of philosophy.
The father of,
This is going to answer the question, by the way. His whole career, so to speak, got off the ground because the Oracle of Delphi told one of his friends, when the friend asked the Oracle, who's the wisest person around, the Oracle said, Socrates. Mm-hmm. And his friend thought, Socrates? What? You know what I mean? So he goes back to, I think it could be the markets or something like that, and tells Socrates, hey, did you know you're the wisest person around? Socrates thought, well, that's rubbish. I'm going to go and prove the Oracle wrong now. Yeah. So he goes to have conversations with people who are apparently educated, respectable people. Yeah. And he asks very simple questions, exactly the questions that we spoke about kids asking. Yeah. What is questions? You know, what is justice? Mm-hmm. You're a lawyer. Tell me, what is justice? Mm-hmm.
Didn't that form the basis for that famous book?
What is
The
truth?
Republic?
Yeah, well, he covered all of these things. And he actually came to the conclusion that he was the wisest person because he knew he didn't know.
No. Yeah.
And I think we've lost some of that. In our kind of idolatry of science, there's a sense in which we know it all, we've covered that, that's old news.
Yep.
Or, you know what, Christian, I was 7 years old when I realised there's nothing to this. You were 7? Right now we can laugh about it, but I'm
but it's genuine,
really
and I hear this. You know what, I hear this all the time
really
as well. Yeah.
Serious that people say that they were 11 or 12 years old.
Yep.
And
they came to these profound conclusions.
They saw through a 2,000-year-old intellectual tradition that without doubt, some of the greatest minds who have ever existed have worked on and pondered. Yep. But you saw through it when you were 11. You know, now this gives you an idea of why pride has always been identified as
one of the greatest sins, or the
not just that, but the root of them all.
The root of them all, yeah.
So for those who are listening and might feel overwhelmed by it, I would say it is difficult, right? But that little piece of humble pie that I eat every day when I read great minds, it's not a bad thing.
It's not.
You know what I mean? It's not a bad thing. And to some extent, it's actually the beginning of real wisdom. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of the students we're talking about, if they were surrounded by people who took a bit more seriously their own intellectual formation and just read a couple of basic books, those kids might not be saying the kind of stuff they're saying now, you know?
You know what, though? It's funny because you mentioned the Catholic schooling system, for example, and in some ways it is a little bit broken in terms of some of the formations that people are getting. And you were speaking about how kids are vaccinated. And they're vaccinated with, I think, certain I wouldn't even call them truths, but certain beliefs that we have that really aren't true.
Yeah. This is why I'm gonna push back a bit on the question. When you use the word broken to describe the system, I used to do the same.
Yep.
Then I read a great article by a professor of law in Notre Dame called Patrick Deenan.
Okay.
And he said, because in the US they're facing similar things, and he said the education system's not broken because nothing that's broken so consistently produces the same thing. You know, broken things are haphazard. You get a mix of this, a mix of that.
And you won't get consistency.
You don't get consistency. But he said these education systems are consistently producing a mold, a character that can't be put down to being accidental. It's a success. It's a sign of success. So you're saying they've been designed that way? Well, here's an interesting example for you. I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yep.
Say, for example, you were to find out that in one school in Sydney, that school has provided 60 to 70% of the vocations to the priesthood over the past 10 years. And you were to find out that there are boys' schools of 1,400 boys who haven't had someone go into the seminary and become a priest in 45 years. Now, say Archbishop Fisher calls up the principal of these schools and goes over and says, look, I've noticed that over the past 40 years, you've put through somewhere in the realm of, let's just say 40,000 students. But not one has had a vocation to the priesthood or religious life. Do you think there's something wrong with that? Now, that's a great question, because this is going to get to what we're talking about. If the system's broken, the principals say, oh, yes, there's something problematic here, because just the sheer probability of it, you know what I mean? Not that you expect 50% of a year to graduate and go into the seminary. That's not going to be the case, but no one in 40 years, it's more likely the case that they're not going to see a problem with it. That it's not so much going to be a cause of crisis for them as a staff to get together and ask, man, what are we doing here to foster vocations, Okay. And so I would say the second thing to keep in mind is that the Catholic school system is very large, and it's pulling a lot of weight for educating society in general. Mm-hmm. That when Catholic schools were first founded in our context here, it was to serve the poorest of the poor. They were predominantly run by religious orders who had dedicated their lives to serving
and to providing education for those who couldn't afford it.
100%, right? Yeah. And slowly what's happened is the Catholic education system has grown to carry a lot of the heavy lifting for state education. Okay, so you've got a very big system that's growing, and it's a broad net taking in a lot of people. Now, at the same time, you've got only about, I think it's around the realm, 10% of those perhaps who call themselves Catholic will go to Mass every Sunday. And of those 10% that rock up, only 10% of them would describe themselves as believing everything the church teaches.
Yeah.
So that leaves you 1% of the Catholic population,
Yeah.
Now, there's no way you can staff all of those schools with 1%. Because you think, well, take that 1%, what percentage of them are teachers? That brings it down even more.
Even further.
So what I think gets created in the system, so to speak, is a lot of head nodding to church stuff and a lot of just keeping your mouth quiet, not stirring the water, and a lot of the idea that Jesus was just a nice guy. He was essentially a liberal ahead of his time, and he was concerned for the poor. And if you're concerned about the poor and you're a liberal of your time, you and Jesus are on the same page.
Yeah.
And that's what they kind of absorb, even if no one's saying it, because that's a lot of what they're surrounded by.
And so the supernatural dimension to the faith is kind of lost.
No supernatural dimension, no intellectual dimension. They're just not there.
There's no substance.
There's no substance. And so they leave not thinking that Catholicism is an intellectually viable and serious school. And at the same time, amazingly enough, they still perceive themselves as Catholic, as disciples of Jesus, as somehow, isn't Christianity all about don't judge? Well, no, it's not. And I'm sorry who gave you that impression, but it's not.
Yeah.
Jesus did not end up on a cross because he said don't judge.
Yeah.
And God didn't send his son because someone needed to say don't judge. There's nothing profound about that.
Yeah.
And if you think that's what Catholicism's about, I'm sorry, but you've been misled.
And so based on that, these are these presuppositions that a lot of these students are coming into these classes with. So you've explained pretty much where they come from. Okay. So you've got the kids that have come in vaccinated. They're probably the hardest ones to deal with.
Now, there might be someone who's just started listening about 10 seconds ago.
Yep. Okay, all right, so that they know what we're talking about.
I don't want them to think that this bloke's gone on a complete anti-vax rant.
No. Okay,
so we were talking about people being vaccinated against the faith, in that they've been exposed over long periods of time to a very superficial, shallow, and sterile
version of the faith. Yep.
That's desensitized them to it.
Yep.
That's what we
But that's so interesting that you say that, because I can just think about a lot of the conversations that I've had with people who even claim to be Catholic within circles that I've grown up in, or family members, who it's almost like there's nothing that you can say to me that I haven't already heard before. When I'm like, I've been studying the faith now for a while, and let me tell you, like, I get blown away almost every day with something that I've read. Yeah. And for you to come and when we have a conversation to be able to say, you know, I don't want to hear it because I've heard it all before, or there's nothing that you can do to change my position on X, Y, or Z, for example. I'm thinking to myself, if only you gave me just 5 or 10 minutes of honest openness. But I think that's something that you need to be able to break with people.
And it can't happen in chance encounters, in group situations.
They have to be genuine.
Think about this, right? Think about when we read the Gospels, so many of the profound encounters that Jesus has with people are one-on-one.
Yeah.
And whenever Jesus comes across mobs, he's very skeptical of them. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a mob that wanted to make him king.
Yeah, the Greeks.
And John tells us that he didn't trust himself to them because he knows the heart of man. Mm-hmm. It's a mob that ends up ensuring he gets on the cross. You know, so the mob in a sense is a very difficult thing. Mobs can't reason. This is a very important point. Mobs can't reason because only individual persons can reason. Mm-hmm. But mobs can create an atmosphere.
Okay.
And mobs can bounce emotion off each other. You know, mobs can be manipulated in all kinds of ways. And so I think there's something for us to learn in that we have to perhaps expect less when we're dealing with big groups at once.
Yep.
But then realize it's those one-on-one moments that have a lot of potential.
Yeah. Because sometimes I watch things on YouTube when I'm looking at encounters and when I'm looking at, from what you just said as well, and maybe like you can probably elaborate on this or touch on the psychology behind this, but I tend to find that debates, for example, are probably one of the hardest ways to win souls, or the hardest ways to get through to people, because people have as an end or as an objective, I know everything. I'm here to win an argument. I'm not here to be open to learning about the truth.
Yeah. You mean the debaters themselves?
No, when people usually enter into a realm of a debate. And so I'm not just talking about formal debates, but I'm even talking about if somebody is going to want to clash with you on something within the classroom, or someone has an objection.
Yeah.
As soon as they're in that mob or within that classroom environment, it's almost like, well, if he corrects me, I lose. Or I don't want to be made to look like I don't know something.
No one wants to be embarrassed like that.
That's right.
And I'm sure this is why a lot of people hesitate to ask questions, because they might very quickly realize, well, I'm struggling to follow this a bit.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask a question and sound silly. Yeah. You know, I think in God's providence, that's one of the most amazing things that the internet is doing, right? Right at a time where there is something of a crisis in our education systems, everyone has access to great quality content, you know, and you don't have to go out there and travel and undergo all the nerve-wracking things of knocking on this person's door and wondering if anyone's going to see me. You know, you can Google and watch some great, well-produced stuff like the show you're doing yourself.
Oh, thank you,
Michael. And so I think when it comes to debating, professional debaters know there is little to no chance the other guy's going to turn around and say,
"Oh,
hey,
wow, good point.
You were right."
Yeah,
you know, you were right. His own supporters would mob him, and you know what I mean. But I think they do it first of all to try and demonstrate the possibility of rational discussion in a world that's convinced that violence is going to ultimately be the result of all disagreements. And for the person sitting in the seat, you know, to some extent, they're not even really talking to the other person.
They're talking to that third person.
That's right. That's right. It's the person watching who hasn't heard all this before, and who's in the privacy of their home and has a bit more freedom of the heart, if we could put it, without that public spotlight.
It's funny though you should say that, because in the classroom, or whenever I've done some form of evangelization, whenever I get into an argument or a heated discussion with somebody, there's always that person that's spectating that I find is getting a lot more out of the conversation that I'm having, or the dialogue, than that person themselves. So sometimes when I'm in a classroom setting, and even though I can tell usually from the disposition of the person that I'm speaking to, I can tell you probably don't really care about what I'm saying. You probably just want to argue with me. You probably have your own beliefs, and I might not be able to change you, but I'm speaking to you for that person, because that person is sitting there quietly, they're listening, and I can tell that they're being very receptive. It's funny how the and how people work that way, eh?
And something that's worth pointing out is, I am a firm believer in the intellect's natural object or end is truth. And what that means is that someone couldn't believe something unless there was some truth in there. You know, it couldn't be entirely false. And so it means that even when people are asking questions or contributing things, even if they might not know much, there's always the possibility that they're shedding light on something we might have missed, or there's been an undue emphasis on some part of the truth that's neglected another part of it. You know, so I definitely just don't want to give the impression that it's one-way traffic.
No, definitely not.
What I find is that one of the most helpful things I can do for students is just help them to properly phrase their question. You know what I mean? Because sometimes the hardest and most frustrating thing is someone has a question, but they're not sure how to express it. They use these words, but that's not really what they mean. And so helping them be able to phrase their question well actually leads them halfway to an answer. You know, and
that's important.
That's not hostile. You know, because it's very obvious you're helping them. You're just trying to kind of, to use another Socratic metaphor, to give birth to that idea that's theirs. You're just trying to help them get that out.
That's right.
And if we have trust in the capacities of human reason, if we help them get it out in its best way, we've probably also done them a huge service and removed a lot of obstacles.
Now, to get a bit Catholic on you, or just to because I was just thinking about something, is it because we've been made in the image and likeness of God, and because we have souls, and within our souls we have intellects that desire truth, this wanting to know truth, is that like, would you say that that's evidence for the fact that God does exist, like that He's created us with this end in mind, that we are seeking truth?
I would say it's because it's a very high power of ours, and if you think about truth as such, is a very profound thing. You know, it's not like food and staying warm or not getting eaten. You know, it's something quite profound. I wouldn't though go so far as to say that somehow it's uniquely adding something to proofs for the existence of God, because like I suggested earlier, that's everywhere once you recognize it for what it is. But certainly the higher creatures start to participate more and more in the likeness of God. So say, for example, Aquinas would say that even rocks are like God insofar as they just exist. Living things are more like God because not only do they exist, but they self-move. Animals are more like God because not only do they exist, not only are they alive, but they're perceiving the environment around them and moving locally through things. They've got memories and stuff like that. You know? So it's certainly true to say the higher you look, and eventually you get to us, the rational animal, we're certainly exemplifying much more. And St. Augustine thought that much moreness was the capacity to know and love.
Okay.
You know, and that's providing the materials which, when perfected, become our knowing and loving of God. And since God knows and loves himself from all of eternity in the Trinitarian communion, when we come forth into existence and return to him by our knowledge and love of him, then we're imaging God in a way that no other material creature can.
Wow.
Our bodies are made of the stuff that stars used to be made of, dead stars.
Yep, stardust.
In us, that stardust comes together and raises its eyes to heaven and says, thank you.
Wow.
And so the Catechism calls us the high priests of creation, in that we gather it all together in us and offer it to God in an act of glorifying him.
Wow. So I wanted to speak about or get back to some of the arguments against belief in God that some of your students might have, or people that you've encountered have. Are any of their arguments credible, or are they just attractive?
Yeah, look, this is a very interesting point, because credibility is again quite a philosophical thing. You know what I mean? If what we're talking about here is what makes an argument valid, sound, then we're in the realm of logic and it's very objective. But if what we're talking about is by credible, it means you can get me to believe it, then it introduces a whole other realm of factors.
Okay.
And just because I can keep telling you I don't believe it doesn't mean it's not credible, you know? So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is, if what we've been talking about so far is correct, it's not primarily for intellectual reasons, because people don't know enough about the faith to reject it on intellectual grounds. There's a sense in which they present themselves as having outgrown it intellectually, but the real reason for it remains behind. So let me give you an example. I once did a debate at UTS, and there was myself and a colleague and two people from UTS were there, and immediately both of the other side presented themselves as ex-Catholics. They give you the usual card, I grew up in such and such a family.
Yep.
And it's always a religious family. I've never heard someone say, I grew up in a nominally Catholic family. My parents had no idea what they were talking about.
Yep.
They were hypocrites. Never heard that.
Yeah.
So people say this to try and prop up their credentials.
And to give them credibility.
Then they'll say, and then, you know, I grew out of it. I turned my back. I lost my faith and whatnot. And I asked each of them, you know, what was one of the best books that you read defending Catholicism before you left? Now, I know the answer. They haven't read it.
Yeah.
I know that. But it's important for them to
realize.
Again, start getting that self-awareness going on, you know?
Yeah.
We've all gone through that experience of going through the teenage years. There's a lot of changes going on.
Yep.
There's a lot of pressure. And, you know, you're susceptible to a lot of influences. You're trying to work out who you are. You're discovering very strong emotions that you hadn't experienced before. There's a lot going on, you know what I mean? And it's very easy to find yourself in a situation where it gets harder and harder to go to church, because you're realizing that a lot of the actions that you're either involved in or want to be involved in, or that your friends are involved in, are contrary to the gospel, you know? And maybe you try and pull them off side by side for a while, but then realize that it's just not manageable morally and psychologically, you know?
That you can't do both.
That you can't do both.
Yeah.
And so you decide that, you know, on Sunday when your parents wake you up, you're not going to go to church, you know? And you certainly think that you're being authentic, that you don't want to put on the show anymore. But if you're going to be authentic, you need to say that, well, part of what's driving my decision here is that I'm involved in X, Y, and Z, and these activities according to what the church teaches about natural law and virtue are immoral. Mm-hmm. But no one says that.
Yeah.
You can't put yourself so manifestly and vulnerably out there. So you've got to dress it up with a publicly acceptable reason.
Yeah.
Something about science, even though you've never read a science book and you don't care about science. Something else that's fit for public digestion.
Okay.
And I think that's the story of Romans 1, St. Paul's letter to the Romans in chapter 1, that people grow up with a very vague, at least, intuition that all of this comes from somewhere, that there is a reason behind everything. And ultimately, it's our being morally compromised that leads us to turn away from that knowledge.
Wow.
And that's something we've lost. And I think that's something people need to be much more aware of when you're addressing especially teenagers. If something presents itself as an intellectual problem, don't necessarily think that's the case.
Okay.
You know?
There's always something else underlying
There's always something else. Yeah. And it's no different to some extent to when people undergo a moral transformation and conversion that then triggers them to start reading more and learning more.
Yep.
The intellectual work come off the back of some profound moral point.
Or experience or
Exactly.
Yeah. It's funny you should say that because in preparing for some of the questions that I wanted to ask you, Romans 1, I felt was very important to bring up, and you did that. And I don't know whether it's this specific passage, but I've got a feeling it might be. So Romans 1:18 says, "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, who by their own wickedness suppress the truth." Now I know that those words are very strong, but it's kind of getting to the crux of what we're kind of talking about. "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." So what are your thoughts there?
I didn't know you were going to read that. Someone watching think, they stacked the deck here.
No.
I did.
Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And I know that St. Paul, it's almost sounding like he's being a little bit harsh, but he's being honest. Would you be as like, if you were going to word that in a way that it would seem like less of an attack to people who are coming to the classroom, or they're coming with these genuine questions, or these objections, are we supposed to have that sentiment within us where we're thinking, you're just living a wicked lifestyle, an immoral lifestyle, and you want to suppress the truth because you don't want to deal with the reality?
Yeah, I don't think that's a productive way to get off.
It's not. No. But I'm saying,
my name's Christian. Yeah. You're all suppressors of the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
You're totally depraved.
Yeah. But you know what's funny though? I actually saw it.
It's not true. No, that's the most important thing. But I'm not saying that because it's not nice. Yeah. It's not true as well.
That's right.
Not true. Yeah.
But the thing is that I actually saw a debate, and I thought it was very unfruitful, where there were theists and atheists that they were debating God's existence. And the theist, who was an evangelical Christian, he said, these people here, they believe that God exists. But the reasons why they don't is because, and then he starts reading Romans 1:18.
Yeah.
But these atheists, they were like, you're attacking us, you don't know us. We genuinely have questions about, genuinely have our reasons as to why God doesn't exist.
Yeah. Which St. Paul is not saying they wouldn't, and that's a very interesting, that's a very good point to mention here.
Yeah.
St. Paul is talking about something much, much more profound and deeper here.
Yeah.
If we go to a simpler example and try and build up from there. Say I walk into a class full of kindergarten kids.
Yeah.
And I say, kids, hands up if smoking's bad for you.
Yeah.
hands go straight up.
Yeah.
Stiff, looking up, they want you to make eye contact with them so they know they got the right answer.
Yeah.
They look over at their friend Johnny. Yeah, Johnny, you got the right answer, your hands up. You might have a couple of kids whose parents smoke, and so it's a bit more, not as wholehearted.
They're a little bit more hesitant to put their hand
not as
up.
wholehearted.
Yeah.
But come back and get those same kids together in year 12.
Yeah.
Say, okay, guys, hands up if smoking's bad for you.
It's going to go up a little bit differently.
They don't want to be completely insane and not put their hand up at all, but they just lift it up a little bit resentfully. Just the kind of...
It's like an acknowledgement.
Enough so that you can't say their hands down, but not so high up that their conscience can entirely condemn them.
Okay.
They look over at Johnny and think, smoking with Johnny behind the toilets. Has he got his hand up?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, look at Johnny's hand up. That guy's just, Yeah. What's going on here? Is it because they've made some great scientific breakthrough in lung physiology No, it's not.
No.
It's that they've become involved in it.
Okay.
And so to some degree, all St. Paul is pointing out here is that we can't think our choices are not echoing back on our ideas and affecting these things, you know. And St. Paul puts first and foremost this idea of failing to give God what he is owed. Mm-hmm. Now, he's not saying that everyone had a doctorate in theology is born with it. Mm-hmm. He's not saying that everyone knows intrinsically how to worship God, but he's saying that there's first of all some turning away from the light that then gets us engrossed in the things of this world, and that to some degree our idolizing of those things turns its own punishment back onto us, that the very things that we turn to for our happiness, money, sex, pleasure, reputation, start to enslave us and drag us down with them.
Wow.
So I think that what St. Paul is describing here is the story of humanity. It's the story of the fall. Mm-hmm. It's the story of the fall, of Adam and Eve failing to give God the worship and honor he's due and falling into sin. But it's the story of our lives to some extent as individuals as well, that it's just as clear to say no one's born an atheist as to say no one's born a Christian or a Catholic. Yeah. And that to some extent there are truths that we perceive about ourselves and about the world around us that, however hazily we might be able to frame them, are there, but then it's our choices and actions that root that up. Yeah. And that's why you often find that when people do start to realize that, wow, this is just not working out, this behavior, and they start trying to turn their life around and get out of a bad habit or vice, most of the time it's within a context of God and prayer and religion. The most successful program in the history of humanity for dealing with substance abuse, Alcoholics Anonymous, was created by Christians, and it explicitly has reference to higher powers, to God, And I would say that tends to be the case, that those two go hand in hand empirically and sociologically much more than we would like to acknowledge.
So when it comes to the solution though, because we're going to be trying to wrap things up now, you gave that analogy at the start about you want your students to realize or to come to the realization that truth is important. How would that form the crux of developing some sort of a solution that can be presented to these students in which it would leave them hungry and desiring more? Because when we were speaking earlier, you were saying, in my classes, when I'm speaking to my students, especially around when it comes to profound topics like, let's say, for example, the same-sex marriage campaign, you want to be able to leave them with not too much, but with just something deep that they can think about, something palatable, but something that they can go away with and something that will resonate with them, and hopefully someone else can do the planting or the watering. Because and we had Sister Mary Helen on the show, and she said something very similar. She goes, when it comes to evangelization, we should never ever we don't want to be the ones in control. It's always going to be God. So when it comes to us, for example, as much as we want the conversions there and then, everything has to work in God's time.
That's right. Because that's like our own conversion. You know, you can't advance in holiness faster than God's grace is giving you. So I think people who show that impatience with others probably would show that impatience to themselves, and that wouldn't be very helpful in their own journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that's why you get a lot of firecrackers, a lot of people who come in all guns blazing and then leave as quickly as they came in. And that's the parable of the seed and the sower.
Yep.
You know, like if you think about Jesus' own preaching, he breaks down some of the ratios. Mm-hmm. So when the sower is throwing the seed out into the soil, a quarter of them will just not take it seriously, won't even entertain it. It's just bouncing off their head and coming back.
Yep.
That means 3/4 initially show some friendly response, right?
Yeah.
Now, over time, 2/3 of those 3/4 drop out, you know, and you're left with 1/4, 1 in 4.
Yeah.
And so to some extent, that parable is a gift that just keeps on giving, because we have to realize that is divine revelation about the situation that we're in, that there are people who, you know, come out of the gate super hard and keen, but then the moment any trial comes along, bang, I'm out, guys, see you later. I didn't sign up for this, you know. And so in a sense, if I'm having a conversation with someone and they're like, Christian, you know, based on what you've said today, I want to be a Catholic, sign me up. I'd be like, well, hang on a second.
Yeah, you actually wouldn't want that, would you?
Not only do I not want that, but you can't do that. You've got to go through RCIA, and there's a whole period of preparation. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think there's a lot of wisdom in the church's tradition there, that we're not just walking around with roll sheets and, you know, and
trying to get people to sign up.
Here you go, and I'll baptize you right now.
Forcing baptisms.
You know, it just it doesn't work that way.
No.
So, you know, you're patient with people, and hopefully that flows out of a patience with oneself as to the need of God's grace.
Yep.
So, those are the things like that. Those are the things I'd keep in mind, and I think that's part of loving others as you would love yourself.
Yep.
Is you wouldn't expect something from them now that would be impossible for you to expect of yourself.
Well, that's true. You know? I think it's about also meeting people where they are.
100%.
And just being able to realise that everybody's different. Because you know what's funny though? It's interesting because some things that, when people talk about this show, for example, they say what we like about the show is that you appeal to so many different people with the different types of talks that you have.
Yeah, yeah.
And when we were forming when we were coming together and we were saying, okay, well, what do we want out of it? What type of talks do we want to give? Because we have a variety of different topics that we speak about. But one thing that always resonates with me, and something that I'm always thinking about, is that there are different temperaments. You've got people that are choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic. So for people who don't know that, look them up. But you've got people that are motivated, or that are driven, or that are interested in way different things. So me being a choleric, for example, I like direct answers. I like it to be systematic. I like the truth. I want it there and then. And
I could never tell that about you, Michael.
At all, could you? Yeah.
I was wondering when you were going to tell me what you really think.
You know what? I admitted it, you know, and I know that it's very hard for you to come to terms with, but that's the truth. I'm a choleric. But I can see that there are other people, for example, like that would be like phlegmatic, that are very emotionally driven, or they want to be able to think about it. People they like the emotional connection that they can make with certain truths or answers. Yeah. And so I know it's very hard for you to do that, because you when you gave me your classroom environment, but do you have that in mind as well when you're thinking about how am I going to
Yeah.
How am I going to speak about these truths with these different...
No doubt.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who, if you can present them an example of someone who believes everything the church teaches as the honest truth and doesn't have three heads, you've already done a great service to the faith. You know, and so that's an important thing. It's important to realize you've got the intellectual side, the ideas, but a lot of them have such images of what a Catholic would be like, a practicing Catholic, that's so propagandized that if you just present as a friendly person who's genuinely interested in them flourishing as a human being, you're accomplishing something, you know.
Wow.
And so I think the truth matters, and that Catholicism is a serious intellectual tradition that has stood the test of time, the rise and fall of cultures and countries and nations and worldviews. You know, like if you're looking around in the 1st and 2nd century, apart from Judaism, the rest are gone.
That's right.
The church has outseen them all.
Absolutely.
And the church will outsee all of its contemporary opponents as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think if people can see that, hey, this is a live player, this is a live option that I need to wrestle with, then I think we're going to see a very quick change.
Beautiful.
G.K. Chesterton said that the most dangerous thing you can do is give the Catholic Church a fair hearing. He was totally convinced that once people just drop the prejudice, then the lights just start coming on immediately.
Well, Bishop Fulton Sheen said something similar.
Yeah, that's right.
You know?
That's right.
And he said, I'll probably bodge it up, but he said something along the lines of, people don't have so much arguments against what the church teaches or what the Catholic Church is, but what they perceive it to be.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's
he said something like there are 100 million Americans who hate what they think the church is and teaches,
but there's probably not even one.
A lot less.
Interesting. So we're going to finish off now, but before we do, tell me, other than the Bible, a book recommendation that you would recommend for people who want to learn more, especially about maybe some of the things that we spoke about tonight. Or maybe a person to get into. I know St. Thomas Aquinas, but I guess he's a profound thinker. I know I'll put you on your feet there.
This is a poor analogy, but it's like asking a wine connoisseur. Yeah, give us a wine.
Give us a wine. What do you recommend? So
I think.
Where would you? Okay, in other words, how would you like people to get started?
Yeah. Beautiful. How do you like people to get started?
Yep.
I mentioned to you guys that I did exercise science earlier, and people wanted to know, what's the best workout?
Yeah.
What's the best workout? You know, and they sit there and they crunch out, do all these searches. The best workout, 8 reps or 10 reps, 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 exercises, 6 exercises, morning, night, this and that. They ask you 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
Then you realize they haven't been to the gym in 15 years.
So you're going to destroy them.
So the best step, right, to take is the next one right here, whatever that is.
Whatever that is.
Right?
Yep.
Don't wait for the best one. Just start with what's there.
Okay.
So that's what I say to people when it comes to reading and stuff like that. First of all, start with something that you're personally interested in.
That's important.
Because that's going to help you to get through it.
Yeah.
Right? And the second thing is, don't get hung up on trying to work out what's the best thing to read, because the truth is that probably if you do ever work out or find out what the best thing is to read, you won't be able to read it.
Yeah.
You've got to work your way.
You've got to work your way to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I would say that. I would say start with the Gospels is a good place to start. Reading the Gospels in quiet with yourself, especially if you haven't done it in a long time.
Yeah.
And then I would say people like Peter Kraft, Kreft, writes really accessible books.
He does.
But yeah, I don't. Similar to the workout example, just get in, start moving around, start rubbing shoulders with people, and you'll find that you'll get guided into what you need once you're in that place and handling the equipment, so to speak.
Okay, awesome. Well, that probably just we've got no more time, but good luck with your doctorate. I'm going to be looking forward to reading, I guess, your thesis if you
Not
let me.
as much as I am. Not as much as I am.
Fine. How long you got? How long you got left?
So I'm part time. Oh my gosh, I even hate saying it out loud, but I've got to the end of 2024.
To do it. So you got a while to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
right,
I'm coming to the end of my second year part time.
All right.
And similar to yourself, got a young family that I'm trying to juggle, working full time.
Yeah.
But chipping away.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that anyway.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for being on the show. Guys, thank you for tuning in. Please like and share this video on Facebook. My name is Michael Obeid. Thank you very much again, Christian, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're a champion. Guys, that was another episode. Take care, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Father Daniel Russo, and I'm here with the team of Atheist Media. What's fantastic about this initiative is that it's an Australian-based catechetical resource. In other words, it's our Catholics right here at home who are teaching us about Jesus Christ in an uncompromised way. We're learning the fullness of the truth and nothing less. We're also supporting our local priests, nuns, and laymen and women, and empowering them to be educators in the faith, to be evangelizers. So by supporting this initiative, you're supporting the church in our country. So get on board and support Atheist Media.